Now it's time to introduce Sasha Prztyk. He's going to be the first presenter of the Polish contingency, and after him will be Richard Kozlowski, Dr. Professor, and after him Jerzy Prztyk. And I guess we can begin.
Yeah, I got the stuff up here, so. Thanks, Martin. Yeah, could we have a little more light to start it off? I won't get right into the slide presentation until a bit further on. My name is Sasha Prztyk. This summer I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to go to Poland and work on an apprenticeship in hemp agriculture under Dr. Kozłowski and his team of scientists at the Institute of Natural Fibers. I'll talk a little bit about hemp in Poland. It's a very traditional crop. It's been around probably since the Slavic tribes first started to settle the land, and it's well known by most people in Poland, especially the older generation. It's mainly known to be like the most versatile and cheap material that you can use for a variety of household purposes, ranging from twine to insulation. It's common to see it used for insulating water pipes and plumbing in houses, and it's got all kinds of other uses. It's deeply rooted in the folklore in Poland. There's a lot of stories surrounding hemp, and a lot of fond memories. When you talk to older Polish people, they can remember the hemp fields that were part of their youth. If you can imagine what kind of a playground they provide for kids, 3 to 5 meter forests of hemp. So, okay, get this thing working here. Okay. I'll briefly introduce the Institute of Natural Fibers. They have a long history of research surrounding hemp, dating till about back till 1958, and it used to occupy a more central position in their scope of activities until about 10 years ago. But it's been in constant decline since the beginning of the 60s, and it's been especially bad since the collapse of the Soviet Union, who was Poland's main client. And since then, the cultivated area has plummeted, and last year was at an all-time low of 2,700 hectares. But I believe this trend is about to end, and there's promising new directions for hemp in Poland. And I think it was encouraging to witness a revival beginning in Poland, a hemp revival led by Dr. Kozlowski and his team of plant scientists. Over the years, research on hemp has been focused on a wide range of topics over the years. It's kind of hard to talk with a mint in your mouth. Sorry about that. Okay. So, the Institute of Natural Fibers have focused on a wide range of topics, including sowing techniques, machinery, harvesting, fiber extraction technology, weaving, spinning technology, fiberboard production, farm machinery design, soil and environment health, as well as hemp breeding methods. They have a reference library over there which contains at least 100 of their own research papers on hemp and about as many books uniquely on the subject of hemp. This is what the hemp looked like when I arrived in the beginning of May. It'd been sown late, end of April. Usually it's sown in the middle of April. So you can see there's already formed a canopy which chokes out all weeds. And that takes about a week to emergence, and then around 2 weeks until you achieve this canopy. So while I was in Poland, I took a particular interest in hemp breeding techniques. It was what I found the most interesting. The Institute of Natural Fibers comprises several research stations situated in different areas of Poland, different climates. And it's an extensive breeding program. This is what a fiber plantation looks like, a normal height of 2.5 to 3 meters, somewhat shorter than what you would get when growing for seed. Here the density is high, about sowing rate is about 50 kilos per hectare, and it results in a density of about 100 to 200 plants per square meter. By the way, this plantation was grown right near a copper refinery, and there's a lot of heavy metals to be found in the soil. But with the research that the Institute of Natural Fibers has been doing, they found that it has no adverse effect. The presence of heavy metals has no adverse effect on the growth of hemp. So it thrives even with significant levels of lead or cadmium. So it can be useful to reclaim toxic soils which are no good for food production anymore. But Dr. Kozlowski will talk more about that when I'm done. So for best fiber quality, this field will be harvested before it goes to seed. And there's several ways of sowing hemp, and this is a very high density crop for fiber. The density will go down a little bit as plants die out. There's a self-thinning effect, and if the density is too high initially, that effect will be even more pronounced. So you'll have a lot of dead plant material, which really inhibits fiber quality. Now this is a seed plantation, or rather a breeding plot, a breeding microplot. And you see flax in the foreground is already maturing, just about ready to harvest. And the hemp in back there, hasn't flowered yet. It'll grow another 50 centimeters before it's ready to harvest. Of course, when the plants are this high, it creates some difficulties in harvesting, but this is a plot about 100 meters by 100 meters, which is about the standard for a selection plot. Yeah, you can compare the growth of hemp to corn. Significantly higher. However, the biomass is pretty similar, the output. Although hemp grows longer, It's got a slightly longer season. Okay, the Institute of Natural Fibers, their breeding stations are important, very important to the Polish hemp industry. They're responsible for providing farmers with high-quality certified seeds. They're actually the exclusive providers of seeds in Poland. And they're responsible with providing farmers with varieties that are adapted to local conditions and technologies. Farmers aren't allowed to import hemp seed from any other source because the import of hemp seed was discontinued to standardize the hemp production in Poland, because probably prior to that, prior to the standards, there were several varieties being grown, and they had all different characteristics. So the Institute is Poland's sole exclusive certified hemp seed provider. So since 1958, the Institute has supported a continuous breeding program, and but at present the Institute's hemp selection work is being carried out at only 3 locations. The work is virtually limited to the improvement and the preservation of existing cultivars. And since the beginning of the breeding program, the selection work has been directed at 3 main goals: to increase the proportion of fiber in the stalks, increase the quality in terms of fineness and also uniformity of the fiber, and also to develop chemotypes with trace cannabinoid content, as you know. These criteria are pretty much unrelated. You can breed the modern hemp varieties. They have been bred to favor mechanized harvesting and produce superior yields and content of fiber, but they often compromise the quality or degree of fineness. Cannabis is a very plastic plant, as you may know. That means that many desirable or deviant characteristics can be successfully made dominant through breeding in relatively short time. And proof of this is in the enormous range of sizes and colors, shapes, growth habits, potency, etc., attributed to cannabis varieties from around the world. Since 1958, since the beginning of the program, the Institute's program has been focused on monoecious hemp types. These hemps have different flowering habits than classical, natural dioecious hemp, in that 95% of the plants produce seed carrying both female and male flowers. There are several reasons why only monoecious hemp is grown in Poland. The most advantageous aspect of this is the low degree of variability among individual plants. There's no need to remove the males, yet there's adequate pollination provided by some small male flowers. The appearance of monoecious hemp is mostly female. You have to sort of look for the male flowers, and this isn't an accident. They've been selected for over many generations. So the uniformity of monoecious hemp encourages it eases the harvest, the mechanized harvest, the field redding, and the subsequent fiber and seed extraction. When you have dioecious hemp, the male plants typically ripen earlier than the female plants and start to deteriorate before the female plants mature. And well, it's normally a half and half male and female in dioecious hemp. But in the case of monoecious hemp, 95% of the plants produce seed. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. There's two registered varieties at the moment in Poland, Beniko and Białobrzeskie. They typically mature in late September, produce 9 to 10 on average, 9 to 10 tons per hectare of dried fiber, dried stalks, and an average about 500 kilos of seed per hectare. But there have been yields of up to 1,200 kilos recorded. And of course, the THC levels in the hemp are low enough so that they exclude any danger of appealing to cannabis smokers in any way. And in Poland, hemp is much better known for its fiber, the uses of its fiber and cellulose and seeds, than for its narcotic aspects, if you can call it that. Recreational, yeah. Cultural uses. Okay, here you have two scientists at one of the Institute's breeding stations. What they're doing is checking the flowering tops for the ratio of male to female flowers in the plants. And this is a breeding plot, so they have to remove all the plants that are undesirable, leave the most desirable plants to reproduce to improve the variety for the next generation. So ideally, there's only a few male buds, and you need to look quite closely. Right now, this is in the early stages of development, before too much pollination occurs. That's about the size of a breeding plot, and each plot has to there has to be a distance of about 3 kilometers between plots of different varieties, so that you don't get mixes, contamination of the variety. 3 kilometers is a lot, but I've seen plots that were quite a bit closer than that, as long as you have some natural barriers there, like trees or woods. This is the famous Białobrzeskie breeding plot, which is a variety which has been around for quite a while. It's well proven. And that's the density in a breeding plot, about 35 centimeters between 35 centimeters between each plant, and up to a meter between rows. That allows the technicians to work in the field, walk between the rows, and look at each plant individually. There was a row of hemp planted as a windbreaker, and you can see the stubble here. That was the first row, was planted uniquely to protect the breeding plot, and it was cut down once that they were solid enough to develop on their own without being endangered of lodging. Here you see some Institute workers examining the flower distribution again. Also, the Institute runs, they test their varieties constantly test them for diseases and contamination under greenhouse conditions. Flax is, at the moment, is a bigger theme at the Institute. There is actually a lot more going on with flax right now, but they haven't abandoned hemp, and they're not about to. Everybody's enthusiastic over there. It was so you take in order to really select the proper forms that you want to create monoecious hemp. They categorize the different flowering distributions. There's up to 7 different guidelines, 7 different profiles used to rate the flowers, and that ranges from pure males to pure female, with everything in between. The ideal in monoecious hemp is closer to the female plant. Those are male buds. Here, I'll show you a bunch of different types which emerged. This is a young female plant, a pure female plant, which should be removed when you're breeding for a monoecious hemp. And this is more like the ideal. You can see the yellow flowers are the male buds, and the tops are female, but they develop a little later. There's different types. That's a pure male plant. If monoecious hemp is grown for several years in a row without any selection, without removing the plants, the undesirable plants, it'll revert back to the dioecious state, to the natural state. So if you plant monoecious hemp for a couple years in a row, you'll start seeing male plants in there, and they'll pollinate a large proportion of the surrounding monoecious plants. So every year you're going to get more and more male plants in there, more and more single-sex plants. So there's a deterioration in the variety. One of the this might affect the THC content. The first generation is the one which is guaranteed to produce less than the legal limit of THC. After the first reproduction, it may change. It may be slightly higher without any selection. This is a monoecious flowering top in full bloom. Again, there's a problem. I think the machine is jammed there. So, thanks. Oh yeah, that's the next one. This is a wild hemp plant. It's called Cannabis ruderalis by some. It can still be found in ditches and on roadsides in Poland. It's a weedy type of hemp. And I found this specimen at the Museum of Agriculture near Poznan, where I was studying. Actually, there's 2 plants there. There's a male and a female. And I found some plants growing all over the garden. And this was in a public area, so there was really not too much worry that someone is going to come and rip it off. The machine doesn't like me very much. This is what happens to hemp when you have extreme conditions of drought, or when you have very, very low water table. It survives. It slows its growth, starts losing its leaves, And it takes quite a lot for it to actually start dying out. And you very rarely see this. In cases like this, it should probably be harvested at this particular point. The fiber quality isn't really affected by droughts, unless they're very severe. This is on my way back from Poland. Actually, I visited some facilities in Holland. This was at the Hash Marijuana Museum in Amsterdam. And this is what commercial production of medical marijuana or recreational marijuana looks like. A variety called Big Bud, which has been a lot of work has gone into breeding these varieties. Underground breeders, especially in Holland and California. And these varieties boast production of 200 grams to 400 grams per square meter. And when you factor that in, it comes to about 2 to 4 tons of seed, a potential of 2 to 4 tons of seed per acre. Now, the highest we've seen is 1,500 kilos in industrial hemp. That was in Hungary, 1,500 kilos. And that's an ideal for hemp. It's hard to reach. But here we see yields of up 5 to 10 times superior. And all I mean to do by showing this is that there's incredible potential for breeding high-producing seed varieties. And it might be useful to use drug varieties as breeding material in this event to increase seed production. Incidentally, there are types of marijuana which flower they flower when they're very short. They can flower in the middle of the summer or in August. And so there's a minimal, if you're not harvesting for stems, I think hemp has a possibility of being a very high yielding oilseed crop. Here's some of the machinery that we saw earlier on with the Ukrainian pictures. This is the de-seeder. It's built in Russia, designed in the Ukraine. And that's a problem now that the Ukraine and Russia are no longer one. There's engineers at the Institute of Bast Fiber Crops in Glukov in the Ukraine designed this machine. And it's used all over East Europe. Here's another view of the de-seeder. It's a stationary machine. You just park it in the field and push the shocks through by hand. It cuts off the tops of the bunches and de-seeds them. It's the harvester. They're very heavy machines, and there's no hydraulics involved. This is what the harvesting looks like in Holland. I happened to arrive right at the proper moment to be able to witness some of the harvesting, and it's a completely different process. There's a company called Hemp Flax, which have been pouring money into hemp research, and this fiber is destined for paper. So it's a German harvester. It's a baler, and it produces 150 kilo bales. The stock has to be retted for 2 to 3 weeks in the field before this can be done. And in that process, a lot of the nutrients and nitrogen components are returned to the soil. Actually, I saw this machine breaks down quite often. It's not quite perfect yet. I saw it, maybe I arrived on a bad day, but it was breaking down just about every row. So, you gotta bring your mechanic along. And Hemp Flax is working on, they haven't started pulping yet. They're waiting until this warehouse is full of hemp, and that's going to take about 2 or 3 years. They're converting an old mill, an old paper mill that's in disuse, into be able to use hemp and recycled fibers. Okay, this is some of the post-harvest processing in Poland. There's two different processes for extracting fiber. And this process is called hackling or combing. What it does is it produces very high quality long fibers. And basically it's a series of combs, each finer and finer combs, just combing the hemp until you down to the finest possible length, diameter. Sorry. And these are some workers on that machine. You can see this is actually not, this factory is not in actual production. It's for experimental purposes at the Institute. And this factory is a little bit in disuse. They've cut down on the lighting. And this is the sketching line. It's the other process which involves separating the secondary and primary fibers. It's the process that some of you might be familiar with. They basically the hemp stalks go through a series of rollers, repeated several times, and this separates the long fiber, this long and short fiber, from the herds. The herds fall down and are sucked up to the basement, actually. And the long fibers and short fibers come out at the end in a big tangle. The process is repeated 3 times. Here's a worker putting the fiber right back into this entry of the machine. There's quite a lot of dust despite all the ventilation here at on this machine. There's a lot of dust collecting. However, I talked to the workers, and apparently there's very little danger. And the foreman had been working at this plant for something like 15 or 20 years or more. And breathing this, he said he'd been breathing the dust day in and day out, and he had absolutely no problem. The last machines we saw there can be used for flax and hemp. Actually, this machine is much wider, designed to accommodate the longer bundles of hemp. And in the sketching process, the secondary and all the fibers are baled and can be used for purposes other than spinning or weaving mainly. Can be used in non-woven materials in combinations with other textiles. While I was in Poland, I was fortunate to accompany a delegation from the Institute to go and participate in an exchange with the Ukrainian bast fiber crop. And here you get to look at some dioecious hemp. You can see the male plants are dying out already. They're quite a bit taller than the females. And this It's a very interesting plot. They've been growing hemp continuously in the same field for 60 years without any interruption. And they've done different experiments with fertilizer. Each plot has, in this case, they used 20, I can't read the numbers for there's a combination of soluble fertilizers and manure, which has the best results apparently. 20 tons per hectare of manure. And it's not as tall as it could be, but even after 60 years, you can still grow hemp as long as you fertilize. This is a variety they're developing in the Ukraine called USO 45, which I was told was approaching 0% THC. Quite an ideal plant. Even with, there's a lot of spacing between the plant because it's a breeding plant, but there's hardly any branching. There's very little branching. So all the fibers in the stalk and can be used, because when you have a lot of incidental branching, those branches, the fiber in those branches, don't count as long fiber. They're not harvested by the hackling process the first process that I showed you. And this is an interesting method for breeding in the Ukraine. What happens here is they're trying to hybridize late flowering varieties, which are in the underneath the cloth and in the boxes, with naturalized Ukrainian varieties surrounding it. And in order for the southern varieties, the late flowering varieties, to flower in time to produce seed, the workers just cover the boxes up for long enough so that just reduce their daylight hours during the summer, so that they start flowering artificially. And the cloth is another way, the shade cloth is another way of inducing premature flowering. Also protection from birds, because birds, in my opinion, is like the first, the main predator of seed hemp. They love it. This was at they have a museum of hemp in the Ukraine. These are different varieties from different zones of the Ukraine. A word about earlier on we were talking about methods, practical methods for testing THC. In the Ukraine, what I saw was a technician was working in the field, and she had a solution. Unfortunately, I didn't get the composition of that solution. She would take a sample of the flowers, the flowering tops, and simply drop a couple of drops of the solution on the small piece of flower, and according to the content of THC, it would become brighter, more or less bright red. And if there's no THC, it would remain clear. So I thought that was a pretty useful test. Of course, it doesn't give completely accurate data, but enough so that you know that a plant is going to produce too much THC, and it should be removed. Also, they used their techniques of observation. They look at the resin production on the plant, the smell, and they have a lot of experience in that. So they use those factors also in determining which plants should be removed from breeding plots. And here are some products that are being made in the Ukraine at the Museum of Hemp. You have some traditional marine rope, and twine, machine belts reinforced with hemp fiber, and paneling, press wood, press board, cloth, and you have some steel cable reinforced with hemp. I found that, I was surprised by that one. So basically, I was really lucky to be able to spend the summer in Poland, especially at such a high-class institution. And I plan to return there this summer to begin my master's degree in hemp breeding. Does anybody have any questions?
Is there any people in Poland, like yourself, you're going to Poland to learn, do your masters, etc. What we're interested in our farm is if there would be people from Poland or Ukraine who would come and stay on our farm for the summer and help.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of interest in the Ukraine and Poland for people to express their interest to me, participate in an exchange, help us to get this thing off the ground. And all that's needed is a little funding. Okay, thanks a lot. Now I'll introduce my my father, Jerzy. Okay, Dr. Kozlowski is going to go on first.
Stay.
So I have to put the slides.
Yes, I just start to.